Now I've got the left-hand side of the vehicle finished and it's going back together. Just whacking on this sound deadener shit. So what can I tell you about the left-hand side of the vehicle? It is a right royal bitch. There's much less room on this side of the car, and that makes for not a lot of fun and games. So I guess the only tip that I could give you is I would do the right-hand side of the car first, because it's the easiest, and it'll blood you and get you ready for what you're going to experience on the left-hand side of the vehicle. Because if you started on the left, you could get discouraged pretty quickly, but knowing that you got half of it under your belt already goes a long way to getting this side done, just for your mental head state. Because believe it or not, I've found this job as much a mental battle as it has been a physical one. And when I say mental, I don't mean mental as in knowledge to get the job done. I mean as in, holy shit, do I have enough left in the tank to get this done? Because it is tough and it has the potential to beat you in the mind. It does help to take a little bit of a break from time to time as well. Step out of the shed, go do something else. Clear your mind, especially if you start making mistakes. All right, well, I'm going to continue to button this up. I'm going to put the fuel lines on first, and then I think I am going to take a break. It's Easter Monday. I've been at this since... was it Good Friday did I start? Or maybe it was even on Thursday that I started. Anyway, it's enough time to say, okay, let's enjoy a little bit of this long weekend anyway. I am just going to torque down these fuel lines, and then I think I'm going to call it quits. So I'm torquing these suckers down to 31 Newton meters, and then I'll tap out for the rest of the day, I think. And there's a mistake that's telling me it's time to down tools. That pipe has to be affixed in place before these fuel rails can go in place to the injectors. Oh, far out. We've got to undo all 4 of them. So this little puppy goes down first before anybody else gets a go. All right, now time to button all of this stuff back down. I'm going to try and do this in a little bit of a logical manner. I'm going to start with the vacuum lines and the vacuum system. Some of the brackets are shared with the electrical system, for example. So you've got to do them both in those cases. Like this little vacuum line bracket here has got a bolt here, shares some electrical cables. It's got another one down here, and it's got another one over here. Now, in terms of vacuum lines, I just disconnected 2 of them. One here to the vacuum pump, and the second one was this little sucker here. All right, that's all zipped up. While I'm over here at the vacuum pump, I might as well pop this connector on. And this connector here goes onto this little vacuum port. Now this main wiring harness has a few 10mm bolts that hold it in place, but there's only one on the bracket here itself. Next I'm going to feed this wiring harness that went to the positive side of the battery. Actually, it went to both the positive and the negative side. It went underneath of this guy. And I had 2 10mm bolts up at the top here that held it in place. Now that I've got that battery cable run over there, I can hook all these earths back up. I won't connect the battery to the car, of course, but I'll get everything locked down on this terminal. And then don't forget this little guy. Remember, he went up against the inner guard here and is held in with a 10mm bolt. All right, that's got the negative side. The positive side here is much the same. I'm just sort of moving shit back from whence it came. The one that went over the engine bay goes down first. Then there's another factory one that drops down on top of him. And then if you've got any accessories plugged into this main battery, they go on last. Okay, now I'm going to install this fuel assembly pipe. I went something like that. It's got one 10mm bolt down here that holds it on. And it's got a 10mm nut that sits up top here. Our little 10mm M6 bolt goes down here. And we'll plug in the lines. There was one here, and there was the second one here, and that was the one that I put the tape on so that it didn't screw up the line going to the right spot. And that fuel line pops on there. If you haven't got yourself a pair of these angled needle nose pliers, they are brilliant for working on these clamps. The last thing to go into place on this line is the banjo bolt and the sealing washer. Now I don't have a new one of those washers, unfortunately, so I'm gonna have to use the old one. Obviously I don't want this to leak, but it's not as critical as the ones that were in the engine bay, because if this does leak, it'll just strip into the valley of the motor and then out onto the ground. Torque that down to 30 Newton meters. Okay, let's hook up some connectors now. Wire's got a bit of memory, so it shouldn't be too difficult to work out which goes where. The other good thing is that each plug is a different size. Down here in the bowels, we've got each of our injector plugs. And once you've done all the plugs, then you can connect up these wiring harness giant hooky things, I guess. That guy there. This guy goes here. This one goes in here. Now over to the fuel lines. That one pops in here. And this big long snaky one pops in here. You can't get those two wrong because they're two different sizes. Well, I guess you could get them wrong, but if you do, you're a moron. All right, we're looking pretty good on this side. The next thing I'm going to do, which you probably won't have to do, is hook up the connector for the Unichip Q4. Next on the list is this PCV box. The reason that I left it till last is because it's so big and bulky. It just gets in the road of everything when you're trying to work in here. And if it's one thing that you don't need is shit in your road when you're working on this stuff. I'm only running these down with a little quarter drive because they're just going into plastic on both ends. I think the torque spec's around 10 Newton meters, which is not a lot. Sort of wrist tight with a quarter drive. Now this connector harness plugs into that little spot there. And this connector harness to number 2 injector plugs into there. All right, now I'm gonna move on to this devil pipe for the cooling system. Why do I call it a devil pipe? Because it's got so many bolts holding it in and so many hoses going to it. I'm just gonna start the bolts. I'm not actually gonna run them in and tighten them down. If you can't hold the bolts and you just need a bit of an extension, I put a little bit of tape on the socket so that I can get down into places where my fingers can't reach. All right, that pipe there fed into here. That popped down on that stud. And then this one fed around and popped down on the same stud. I'll just start that nut on the studs very slightly. Now that pipe fed onto the back fitting. And that pushed on there a fair distance. Good 50 mil. This little pipe fed onto here. This big honker on the front fed onto here. I try and get the clamps back into the spot where they were originally because they seat there a little bit better. Now I can run this little M6 bolt down. I will tighten that one up because all of the pipes underneath of the intercooler are now all connected up properly. And now that nut that runs onto that stud. And now a little M6 bolt that connects these two pipes together. Now that connector can go back in place. And that wiring loom has got a little tab here. And last but not least are my 2 coolant lines, which go into the heater core and out to my shower, which is mounted inside of the bull bar. Next thing I'm going to pop on are these air sub-assemblies for the throttle bodies. This particular one has the dipstick tube attached to it. Try and get those as level as possible because obviously the intercooler bolts onto those. And these faces on this flange here should be level. That's good. I'm over on the left-hand side of the vehicle now. Nice. Now remember, this side had my dip breather bracket bolted to it. Now the air inlet ducts. That duct had one big, in quotation marks, M8 bolt holding it in place. That's nice and tight. I'm not going to tighten this one up completely because I'm just not quite sure of the orientation of that hose that's got to connect to the intercooler, and I might have to move it or clock it a little bit. Now I'll hook up my catch can hoses. If you don't have a catch can, this will go directly to your PCV box. All right, I got the right-hand drive ductwork in place now. Wasn't too difficult, just got to do a little bit of gymnastics to get to one of the hose clamps in particular. Pop that duct back in where it belongs. Very good. It's held in with 2 M8 bolts. All right, I'll tighten these 2 hose clamps down first. Very good. 2 M8s, the one in your face. Now the wiring loom for the coolant temperature sensor. It's got a couple of places where this loom clicks into. 2 of them were on that pipe, if you recall. And then the coolant temperature sensor. All right, getting to the pointy end now. Looks like it's intercooler time. I'm actually going to pop it in place to make sure that my hose clamps are all situated in the right spot before I go hooking anything up. All right, that hose is oriented in the right way. And this hose, not quite. That's better, that looks pretty good there. Okay, now we'll shift the intercooler forward a little bit so that I can get to those plugs on the back and that little hose on the back. All right, I've got the camera pointed back there, but I don't know whether it's gonna pick anything up because it's so friggin' tight working back here. There's the coolant temperature sensor. There's the map sensor. Now I gotta get that little tiny hose connected. And that's the sucker that I'm trying to connect. And that's what happens when you're trying to connect it. And I don't have a bit of replacement hose that's any longer than that. I'm going to try attaching it to the map filter first, then the intercooler. See if that's any easier. I got that little hose on by tipping up the intercooler and working at it from underneath. All right, let's get this intercooler bolted in. All right, intercooler down in place. 2 bolts on the outlet flange on that side done. 2 on that side done. The 2 mounting bolts on the back of the intercooler done. The 2 mounting bolts at the front of the intercooler done. Still got to tighten up the clamps on both pipes and then put that little intercooler cover mount on the back here with those 2 10mm bolts. Getting to the real pointy end now. Putting in the air cleaner. Okay, I'll pull off this little engine breather, which sits right underneath the intercooler on the driver's side or the right-hand side. That's him there. And what that little guy does is just allows air to escape out of the engine block as you're filling up the cooling system. Some brand new super long life coolant. Filling up this coolant is a long drawn out process in the 200s because you've got to fill up this reservoir and then it's got to drain from the reservoir through the radiator and into the engine. I've got a rag underneath that little bleeder valve, so when it starts bubbling out of the engine, put the bung back in and hopefully catch most of the spillage. While that coolant's draining in, I'll hook up my negative battery terminal again. I'll give the fuel system a couple of pumps to get the fuel at least up to that injector rail. As soon as this pump goes hard or gets hard to push, you know that you've got fuel up as far as it'll go. All right, time to set the injector compensation values into the ECU in the car. And this is how you do that. You'll need yourself a copy of TechStream or one of those C readers that I've already reviewed, but some sort of software that allows you to interface with the ECU. And you'll need the cable to connect the ECU to either your laptop or to one of those handheld readers. If you don't have a copy of TechStream, I've already cut a video on how you can get a free copy of this. I'm not going to go into any of that detail here. The reason I'm using TechStream over my C reader, because I've already got the injector compensation values here that have been read off of the QR code on the injectors themselves. So I know there's no typos here. So I'm going to simply cut and paste into TechStream. If I was using my C reader, I'd have to type those codes in there. And with fingers like sausages, I'm bound to make a mistake. So connect up your mini VCI cable to your OBD port. It sits here underneath the dash. Plug the other end into your laptop. Turn the ignition on the car, but don't start it. And then hit connect to vehicle. All right, then you got to select your vehicle. These are model years. So August of 2010 to January of 2012. Mine's a 10 model. Swing out back doors. Nope, mine's an other. Then I hit the next and we wait for it to connect to the ECU of the car. All right, these are all the ECUs and the options you have access to. You want to jump into the engine ECU. You can either click engine and then come down here and click this arrow, or it's a lot quicker just to double click it. Now TechStream is connecting to that particular control module of the vehicle. There we go. This screen here just gives you any diagnostic codes that the engine is showing, which are none. But what you want is you want to jump into utility. And these are the options that you've got. You want to jump into injector compensation. This function is used to set the compensation code for the new injector assembly or the injectors to the ECU when replacing the injector assembly or the injectors. That's me. Next. This function must not be operated without referring to the service manual. Okay, I'm going to ignore that. We want to set the compensation code. Hit next. We want to select our cylinder. In this case, we'll start with cylinder number 1. Hit next. And this is where you input your compensation code. As I said, I've already got mine here. I'm just going to highlight that. I'm going to hit Control C for copy. Then I'm going to hit Control V to paste them in. Then I'm going to hit the next button. And it's now setting it. That compensation is complete. Press next to set the other cylinder, or press cancel to exit the function. We're going to hit next because I got to do them all. Set our compensation code. Hit next again. Select our second cylinder. Hit next again. This time I'll copy cylinder number 2. Hit our next button, and that's it. I'm going to continue to do that for the remaining 6 cylinders. I'll get you guys back on the line once I've finished. All right, I've got all 8 cylinders done now. And it says press next to set another cylinder, or press cancel to exit the function. I'm finished, so I'm going to exit. Now what you can do as well, you can jump back into your injector compensation and you can hit read compensation code. So let's just randomly pick cylinder number 4, for example. Hit the next button. It retrieves that compensation code. So if you want to double check, this is an area where you can do the double checking. I'm not going to double check because, as I said, mine was all scanned off of those QR codes, so I'm pretty confident that there's no errors there. So I'm going to exit the injector compensation. Now there's nothing to stop us from kicking this puppy in the guts. But before I do that, I'm going to pull out the dipstick. I'm going to have a look at that oil level, and I'm going to take a photo of it. The reason I'm doing that is I want to monitor that engine oil level very, very closely for the first little bit of driving to make sure that I'm not getting any diesel leaking into that sump. Give this puppy a couple of more pumps. That's good. That's firmed up nicely. The coolant is as full as it can be. The engine's taken everything it can. I've tightened that bung back down, obviously popped that cap on. I'm going to kick it in the guts now and bring her up to temperature. Wish me luck. There she goes. She just barked off. Sweet. Let me jump into my data list. All right, let me have a look at the cold injector values. 1 is 0, 2 is 0.3, 3 is 1, 4 is minus 0.2, 5 is minus 0.5, 6 is minus 0.5, 7 is minus 0.2, and 8 is minus 0.2. Those are bloody awesome. Much, much better than it was on the old injectors. These readings in this data list have a refresh rate of, I don't know, every 15 or 20 seconds or so. And that one injector that was sitting at 1 is now down to 0.4. And I've got 3 zeros in there now and 2 0.1s. Far out, that's tight. Very, very good. No leaks under the car, that's a good sign. All right, I'm gonna take it for a spin around the block, get the engine up to temperature, and bring her back in and let her cool down. Well, I'm out on my test drive. What can I notice immediately? One, it's quieter. I guess you don't realize how rattly the old injectors are until you get a set of new ones in, but it's a lot less rattly. Not blowing any smoke, although it never did, but it's down on power, and it's down on power big time. And I reckon it's that little bloody hose on the back of the intercooler's popped off on me. So I'll take her back home, let her cool down, top her up with a little bit more coolant, and have a look at that little bloody hose. I'll read the hot injector values when I get home as well, see whether they're maintaining that tightness, but I don't see why they shouldn't. Oh, man, look at those injector values, and this is on a hot motor. I got a coolant temp of 81 degrees, and the biggest variance from 0 is minus 0.4. That is tight. Now I'll switch truck down, let the motor cool down, then I'll check that little hose on the back of the intercooler. Have a look at that scan gauge, have a look at the boost gauge up in the top left. I'll nail it, no boost pressure, no changes whatsoever. I just decided to hook the scan gauge up to help diagnose it so that I'm not, pulling intercooler off to check that hose when it wasn't that hose. But given the fact I've got a twin turbo diesel with no boost, I am 99.9% certain that's what my problem is. Alrighty, back home, engine cool down, then we'll check it out. Okay, it's the following morning. I had a fresh piece of cardboard, so I dropped that under the truck yesterday. It's been sitting here for 12 hours, cooled, and there's no drips or leaks. That's what I like to see. Now I've got my little bore scope here again. I'm gonna go back in again behind this intercooler. Let's see if we can see if that hose is detached. There it is. There's the hose on the left and the bung that it needs to attach to on the right. I'm gonna see if I can get my hand behind the firewall and connect it up from that way. Where are you, little hose? I couldn't film it because my big fat fingers were in the road, but I got it connected up to the end of that map sensor. And if we look at the other end, it's connected to the map sensor filter. So here's a tip. If that little sucker ever pops off on you, just in normal driving, you can reach it without pulling the intercooler. You can get your arm between the intercooler and the firewall to get to it. So that's good to know. Okay, next I will check my oil level, specifically to see whether I've got any diesel in there. I'll take a photo of that to compare it to my other one. There's the photo I just took, and there is yesterday's photo. Zoom in a little bit. There's where the oil level was, above the dot. And over here, it looks like it's pretty much in the same position. That's good. It was only a short test drive of about 15 minutes yesterday, so I'll keep monitoring that. But I am encouraged with what I see so far. The only thing left for me now is to fit up the bash plates, call that job finished. So if you're planning on tackling this job, what do you need? Number one, a shit ton of patience. It's not difficult, but it will try your patience. Trying to get to some of those bolts in some of those locations is a masterclass in patience. What about specialty tools? There are a couple of specialty tools that you'll need. First of all, you'll need one of these 17 mil crowfoot adapters. You only need the 17, you don't need anything else, but I can't see how you could get the job done without one of those. 17 mil flare nut spanner is handy as well, but not essential. A bore scope is handy, but not essential. I bought this little puppy off of eBay because I was expecting those washers to get stuck in their seats. And the way this thing works is you screw that into the washer and then you use your slide hammer to pull them out. Mine came out beautifully, no problem at all. But I'd hate to think if they were jammed in and I didn't have this tool, it would be tricky to get them out. Maybe you could fabricate something for yourself. You might be able to use something like one of these stepper drill bits, weld a little bit of a rod onto that to allow you to get down inside of the hole. But without the proper tool, you can do it, just got to be a little bit creative. The other absolute essential item is a laptop with TechStream on it or some other OBD2 reader that will allow you to program those compensation codes into the ECU of the vehicle. What's next on my agenda? Time to hook into Crunchy, my Monte Carlo. Gonna pull that donk out and do a complete rebuild on it, give it 100 extra ponies or so, and then of course, replace all of these panels that are crunched up, then give the car a full respray and put the original sticker kit back onto it. There won't be any more 200 videos for a while, so if you're not into Monte Carlo restoration, we'll see you sometime in the future. Keep the shiny side up, everybody. Bye now.